History can be found anywhere, even in your own backyard. So join us as we search the land looking for the stories that helped shape this nation. Come on the porch, grab a drink, and join us for a little bit of history from the homestead. Hey there, history buffs, and welcome to another episode of the History from the Homestead podcast. I am your host, Thomas Carroll, and today we're going to talk about something quite fun. We're going to talk about the oldest operating roller coaster in the world, and we are joined by American coaster enthusiast, historian, Dave Hahner. Now, Dave was born and raised in the Pittsburgh area in the Mon Valley near Kennywood. His grandfather worked at the park from the mid-1960s to the early 1970s on Noah's Ark. And because of him, Dave would become fascinated in the history and the behind-the-scenes knowledge of the park at a very young age. Dave himself worked at Kennywood from 1979 until 1981 in refreshments while he was still in high school and while he was attending the University of Pittsburgh. In June of 1980, while working there, the American coaster enthusiasts were holding their third annual convention. Dave immediately joined and has been a member now for over 43 years. He is an assistant regional representative for the Western Pennsylvania region, and he eventually became a historian for the American coaster enthusiast in 2008, where he still holds that position today. He has also written many historical articles, including one about the Leap to Dips for their Rollercoaster magazine and for other projects over the years. So, Dave, welcome to the History from the Homestead podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. So today I think it's going to be fun and special because this is actually our now 10th episode.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we're steadily growing. But today we're going to talk about roller coasters, amusement parks, which sounds weird to talk about it around the Christmas season, but
It's never weird to talk about roller coasters, at least not in my neck of the woods.
So before we dive into the coaster we're going to be talking about, give us a short little background on yourself, because you're a member of ACE, American Coaster Enthusiast, and you're a quote coaster enthusiast yourself for what, 40 years?
43 years to be exact. I mean, since I joined ACE. I actually grew up in the Steel Valley area near Kennywood. I went to Steel Valley High School. I was born and raised in the Munhall area. I graduated from Steel Valley High School back in 1979, and that year I started working at Kennywood that summer. I worked there from 1979 through the middle of 1981, and I worked in the refreshment company there. And but my history with Kennywood goes back before that. My grandfather used to work in the park, my mother's father, and he worked on Noah's Ark. And so as a small child, we used to go out there quite often because he used to bring free tickets all the time for us. You know, they were entitled to free tickets. And plus he was also a retiree of WABCO. And they used to have a big picnic out of the park every year too. So we would go many times during the summer. And being that he worked on Noah's Ark, he liked to take us through the back echelons of the attraction, where I got to see how a lot of the mechanisms worked, how the boat rocked. It made it less scary for me too, because I was so frightened to go in there because it was so dark. I was only about 6 years old. But with him going on with the lights on and showing me how everything worked and showing me how fake everything was, I immediately took a fascination to it. And I guess it rubbed off. And to this day, I am still fascinated by how the attractions work in the amusement industry, all from the simple effects like Noah's Ark had, all the way through the Disney attractions and the high-tech Harry Potter stuff that you see at the Universal. So it runs full circle, and here I am, in my 60s, and I'm still just as enthusiastic about roller coasters and amusement parks as I ever was.
No, I think maybe I can guess at it, but first roller coaster you rode.
Um, that's a tricky question because I want to say it's the Little Dipper at Kennywood. However, I believe it was a tiny kiddie coaster up at Geneva on the Lake when I was only about 3 years old,
Oh.
and it scared the bejesus out of me. And the Little Dipper was about at Kennywood was the coaster I grew up with, and I really loved that ride. That was so much fun. Ironically, I was very scared of roller coasters up until about the mid 70s when I got to about middle school, and I was basically forced on the racer and the Jackrabbit and the Thunderbolt at Kennywood. Scared to death the first time I got in for the racer. When I got off the racer, it's like, hey, that wasn't so bad. Got on the Jackrabbit. Boy, that was fun. So we went and did the Thunderbolt, and it's like that was it. A monster was born that day, and I never stopped, since. So it was a lot of fun. I'm kind of glad that those kids bullied me into riding it back then.
Uh, One more quick one before we dive into the subject at hand. Are there any roller coasters that you will not ride that you're still yet afraid to ride?
I'm won't say that I'm afraid to ride. That would probably be the wrong way. I mean, I will ride just about anything. I'm looking forward to that new Top Thrill 2 at Cedar Point coming out next year, which is a reimagining of Top Thrill Dragster. However, as I'm getting older and some health limitations, I'm finding that some of the wildest rides I may only ride once, not because of fear of the coaster itself, but I'm more afraid of, well, let's face it, I don't want to have a stroke or something on the ride. But no, I'm not really afraid of any roller coaster. I've never been afraid of any roller coaster since I became an ACE member back in 1980, which was during a coaster con at Kennywood when I was working at the park. And that's how I found out about ACE. And that became a very strong love affair for 43 years I've been a member. I've been a regional rep for almost 30 years here, an assistant regional rep for the Western Pennsylvania area, and I've been the historian for ACE since 2008. So,
Wow. So, and we're gonna hear a bit more about Ace here in a bit, but we'll dive into the subject at hand now, which is the Leap to Dips coaster at Lakemont Park in Altoona,
mhm.
which, as far as we know, is the oldest operating roller coaster in the world.
Yes, it is definitely the oldest operating roller coaster in the world. It's also the oldest standing roller coaster in the world. Uh, Leap the Dips had a very roller coaster history, we can say. It it wasn't the park's first roller coaster, surprisingly, even though it's the oldest one in the world. There was actually a coaster that predated it. Um, and if I check my notes here, it was a small coaster that was called the Gravity Road Roller Coaster that opened in when the park did in 1894, and then it burned down in 1900. They had a series. Excuse me, that was in 1901. The carousel burned in 1900, and the coaster burned in 1901. So they had a bad stretch of fire back in the early days of the park. But that was not uncommon. I mean, there wasn't modern fire safety protection on rides and buildings back then. So fire was probably the most common threat to amusements. Uh, Even Coney Island suffered from many fires back in the early days. Dreamland, probably one of the most famous amusement parks that opened in Coney Island, burned to the ground within I believe, in like 2 years after it opened. So fire was probably the number one threat to amusement parks back in the day. So they built another roller coaster, this one from the E. Joy Morris Company, back in 1902, and it was a pretty typical standard figure eight roller coaster, and which they called Leap the Dips. There really wasn't anything spectacular about the ride, and it goes a blazing 10 miles an hour at its top speed. It was pretty standard type ride for the era. There was hundreds of these coasters built all across the country and around the world, and it was a side friction roller coaster, which means that it sat in like plywood sides, or not plywood, but wooden track on the sides as well as underneath the ride. So the car, when it would traverse the small dips on it, can actually be it can leave the track, so to speak, like a few inches on some of the wilder portions of the ride. I mean, it's still safe because it's not real aggressive, but certainly a ride like Jackrabbit, which opened in 1920 at Kennywood, was the one of the first under friction roller coasters built by John Miller, who invented the upstop that would go underneath the wheels that would lock the roller coasters to the track. And that's why you can get that tremendous double dip on the Kennywood Jackrabbit and not have to worry about the car flying off the track. It's locked to the track. Leap the Dips, if you did that on there, the car would go flying across the ravine probably. So it was it's a very older technology. It was basically they just roll it down like a trough of track is the best way to describe it.
I see. So I didn't know. I was gonna ask you how those worked. I didn't know. I tried to look, but and these
Well, there's
were
wheels on the sides of the cars, and that's what got their guide wheels to keep with the boards that run alongside the track, and that's the guide boards that keep you on the track.
yeah.
But when you go over the little dips, you'll feel the car, mainly in the front, pop up, and it's actually leaving the surface of the track like an inch or so. It's not dangerous. It's quite safe. It's designed that way. But obviously the coaster is not extremely thrilling either. I mean, you don't have 200 feet drops and and loops and everything else that come today in today's roller coasters. It's a very mild ride, but still a fun ride. I mean, and I encourage anybody that's even remotely interested in the history of roller coasters to go to Lakemont Park in Altoona. It's an amazing piece of history, and this is how all roller coasters were built back in the day.
Yeah.
And this is the last one.
And now it's funny to think in terms of what we know, it was not wild at all per se. But if you think in the 1900s, the very early 1900s, most people didn't even have the automobile yet. So I'm sure
Exactly.
for
It would have
them
been
it was
very thrilling.
thrilling as could be.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very thrilling experience because you went as fast as walking speed or like as a horse would trot. Unless you were on a galloping horse, you probably never went faster than 10 miles an hour. And unless you were on a train. And a train is a little different because it's at a constant speed,
Yeah.
So this, 10 miles an hour may not sound like much today, but back then it was amazing and breathtaking for many riders.
And plus, as you said, you go over, well, hence the Leap the Dips name, you go over the track and actually kind of leave the track. And
You actually leap
it's,
the dips,
I
so to
mean,
speak. Yes.
yeah. Uh, and I'm sure there was plenty of coasters that had the same name. I'm sure
Oh yeah,
that was a
leap the dips was
catch-all
a
name.
very common name. Figure eight railways were usually the most common name for that type of a railway. they were also known as Gee Whiz Dip the Dips or Dip the Dips, or Kennywood had one. It was called Gee Whiz Dip the Dips. It's also known as the figure eight toboggan. They went by many names, just like roller coasters do today, but not as inventive as we have today, not as trademarkable either, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big business now in the amusement parks, where they sell T-shirts and many other things with the logo on it. So,
Yeah, that's you bring up a good point there. We think about, roller coasters today that are built by roller coaster companies. Would these roller coasters in the 1900s, would these have been like roller coaster amusement businesses, or were they more of construction companies who found a little side gig?
it was a little both. They became like pleasure railway companies, a lot of them. E. Joy Morris Company, which was a big attract ride supplier in the time. They um, they built the coaster. They built hundreds of coasters around the area, and they were from Philadelphia. There was other companies that did it too, like excuse me, Fred Ingersoll from Pittsburgh, Lamarcus Thompson, who is often considered the father of the modern roller coaster. He built his Switchback Railway at Coney Island in 1884. And contrary to popular belief, that was not the first roller coaster. There were actually other pleasure toboggan rides that had preceded it. But because it was at Coney Island and because of the way it was marketed, it was often referred to as the first, even though it wasn't. But
Interesting.
Lamarcus Thompson gave it he became very rich from it and he was in the hosiery business and ended up leaving that to build roller coasters because they were more profitable.
Wow.
And of course, they weren't called roller coasters then; they were just called pleasure railways back then. And the term roller coaster, we're not even sure where the term came from, but it started probably in the late 1890s and just caught on at that point as a more common vernacular for that type of ride.
You've mentioned quite a few times a figure eight as well. Is that basically just the essence of layout of it? That it just
Exactly.
figure
It's
eight?
in a figure eight type of layout. It crosses over itself several times, usually in the center portion of the ride. Like they have a dip in the middle, and then it'll dip underneath that, and then it'll dip underneath that. And it's an ingenious way to keep it in a compact area too, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. Now, obviously, some of the bigger roller coasters that came later, they took up a lot more room. They became a lot more, it took a lot more acreage. But these figure eight toboggans are, they were fairly compact. It didn't take up a lot of room. And it was very popular for the park for many, many years. I mean, it brought in a lot of people back in the day. And then another roller coaster was built in 1917 by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. And that was destroyed by the Great St. Patrick's Day flood. That one was called the Twister, by the way, and it was destroyed in 1936 by the St. Patrick's Day flood. And Leap the Dips was badly damaged, as was most of the whole park. Fortunately, the county saw that the benefit of keeping the park as an amusement park and invested money through the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, back in the 1930s during the height of the Great Depression, and they invested money back into the park to give something to the people in the Altoona area to go visit, and they felt it was a great morale booster to have the amusement park open and have the coaster running. So we were fortunate that they invested money in the park then. Then they started investing other into other rides and became a small traditional amusement park for the Altoona area. Ironically, it was one of 3 amusement parks in the Altoona area, and the other one being Ivyside Park, which is now where Penn State University Altoona is located, and the third one being Bland's Park, which is just up the road from Lakemont, and that is now known as Del Grosse's amusement park. So both Del Grosse's and Lakemont Park are still operating and still well, Del Grosse's is thriving. Del Grosse's is just doing fantastic business. They've expanded their water park. They put a lot of investment into their park. Unfortunately, Lakemont just seems to be hanging in there, and it could have been a lot worse for them over the years. In the 1980s, they were struggling, and the owners of the Boyer Candy Company decided they would buy the park, and they wanted to build their own version of a chocolate amusement park like Hershey Park, thinking they could take on Hershey Park, which is only about 2 hours away from Altoona. Unfortunately, they ran out of money during their first season, and they bought a roller coaster from a closed amusement park up in New York, and that was the Skyliner coaster, which is also at the park now. But they didn't even have enough money to finish construction of that roller coaster in their first year in 1986. Leap the Dips last ran in 1985 under the county, when it was still being run by the county. And when the Boyer Candy Company came in, they pretty much tore down almost every building in the park to redo the park. They built this beautiful main street that would lead up to the casino, which is the historic pavilion that was part of Lakemont Park, where they would have dances and people would eat their picnic lunches and such right along the lakefront there. And they had this beautiful main street and a beautiful entranceway, and then they ran out of money. Leap the Dips couldn't operate because being that it changed ownership, they were told by the insurance company that it had to be modernized with modern braking and anti-rollbacks, as opposed to what it had at the time. And so therefore, Leap the Dips sat idle for 14 years.
Wow.
They didn't have the money to put into the coaster. They did finally find some money for the second season to finish the Skyliner coaster and a few other structures in the park. But it was such a dismal season, they ended up going bankrupt at that point. And the park, Boyertown USA was what it was called then, went bankrupt after just 2 seasons and was sold at auction. Anthony Forgione, he was the contractor who built most of the Main Street area and the main entrance, decided to buy the park at a cost, at the auction, and he bought all the rides and all the equipment, and he decided to turn it back into Lakemont Park. However, he didn't have the money to make the Leap the Dips operate either. So Leap the Dips sat and sat and sat, and groups like American Coaster Enthusiasts and National Amusement Park Historical Association decided to come in and see if they could raise money for the Leap the Dips. Believe the Leap the Dips Foundation was founded in the early 1990s, and they were trying to raise money. And there was a local grassroots group that was trying to raise money to get the coaster back open. Lakemont was just a small park. They benefited mostly from a small water park that they had. They had go-karts, and then the Skyliner coaster, which did eventually open, were their main attractions. They did have a few other major amusement rides in the park, such as a pirate ship and circle swing and the typical carnival type rides you would find in a small town amusement park. but it was the operation was just mainly breaking even year after year, and they just didn't have the money to invest in the coaster. In fact, they were looking to possibly tear down the roller coaster at one point because of being an eyesore. Excuse me. And that's when they decided that, with the grassroots group, we need to save this coaster. We don't want it torn down. We want it to come back. We want it to operate again. And the American Coaster Enthusiasts was one of the groups behind that. We raised money. Other groups raised money. Every year they had what they called the Keystone Country Festival at the park, which was a big craft show, and we would operate a table in front of the Leap the Dips, selling raffle tickets, pickets for a fence. You could put your name on, and you would get your name put on a picket around the coaster. And there was other donations that you can make where you get your name put on, like a portion of the ride. And finally, I guess in the late 90s, they were able to garnish enough funds, and it was about $1 million, I think. And a local bank took interest in it too, and helped take over the fund here. And they were able to start restoring the ride. And the ride officially reopened Memorial Day weekend of 1999. And it's been running mainly consistently since. It was down for a few seasons due to the fact that the park closed in 2017 and 18, or excuse me, 2018 and 19, due to they were downsizing the park. They sold off most of their rides except for the coasters and a few permanent rides like the train and the antique cars. And they converted it into more of a family type park, like a picnic park, where they had basketball courts added, miniature golf, batting cages, and it became more of a focus of a family picnic park as opposed to an amusement park. But it was a family picnic park with a few amusements thrown in. And fortunately, unfortunately, I should say, the pandemic hit in 2020, and a lot of parks could not open. Surprisingly, Leap the Dips and Lakemont Park reopened in 2020. I believe it was in July of 2020 they were able to reopen the park, and they were one of the few amusement parks ready to reopen at the time. So that actually helped. The pandemic kind of helped them at the time because there was no one else really, nowhere else you could go. So Leap the Dips reopened then. Skyliner, I believe, was down for another season. I think that reopened in 21. But both coasters are still operating right now. I mean, not this time of year, obviously, but barring any unforeseen circumstances, they should open in late May of 2024. So I hope your listeners will consider taking a drive to Altoona
They
and
better.
enjoy the world's oldest roller coaster
Yeah, they better.
and its
They
sibling,
better
the
get down
Skyliner.
there. Now, you, you talked about how instrumental Ace was for helping and everything, and you've been a member. You're a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is Ace, and how does somebody get to join?
Okay, we're known as the American Coaster Enthusiasts. We are a nonprofit group that started in 1988. I think we have over 8,000 members worldwide right now, and we're growing leaps and bounds almost every year. We just keep growing and growing. And we just had our national convention in Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And we had a record number of attendees at that. We had almost 1,300 attendees at that event, which normal ACE events are about 600 to 800. And we almost doubled that.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, so well, I think the magic of Dolly Parton also helped too.
Well, that definitely didn't hurt, that's for sure.
No, it didn't. But yeah, we are a nonprofit group that was created to enjoy roller coasters, but also to spread uh, the history of it. Like we part of our mantra is that we want to um, educate the public as well as our members on the history of the rides, such as the different designers, different owners that were especially noteworthy in the industry. We also are big into preservation, and we do raise money for preservation, and we try to save as many coasters as we possibly can that are in financial disarray. Our biggest success story was outside of Leap the Dips was the Giant Dipper in San Diego, California, at Belmont Park. That park almost died. It closed in 1976, and that coaster was left to rot. And it was a beautiful coaster built by Pryor and Church in the 1920s, and just sat there rotting away in the gorgeous San Diego area of Mission Beach. How could something like that even? If you visit the location, you wonder how could anything fail there because of all the people visiting there all the time. But at the time, it was not considered. I guess you had other places to visit that were more popular, like Disneyland in the area, and yeah, Belmont Park lost its luster back in the 70s. The coaster sat rotting for many years, and one of our members, Tim Cole from the area, was instrumental in starting their grassroots effort to get that coaster restored. And he was very successful. And of course, Ace helped back him on that as well. And that coaster reopened in 1990 and is now one of the most successful roller coaster preservation stories that we love to talk about, because it became a very successful small amusement park again, and is an integral part of the Mission Beach area now in San Diego. So that's and we tried to help save the Conneaut Lake Park Blue Streak up in Conneaut Lake Park in northern Pennsylvania, and we were successful at getting the coaster reopened back in 2010, and it ran every season through 2019. Unfortunately, the pandemic came, and they couldn't open, and they couldn't raise the funds to reopen after the pandemic. With the regulations of social distancing and such. So unfortunately, the park remained closed and then was sold off to a private developer who had no interest in saving the park whatsoever or the coasters. And basically came in and bought the park in 2021, and in 2022 tore the coaster down and wouldn't even speak to us about it. So he's more interested in building a campground there. So sad, but can't win them all, unfortunately.
No, yeah, but it, how, what is it? Let me rephrase how I want to ask that. How does somebody join? Just hop online, send an application
Yeah,
in.
it's www.aceonline, the one word, aceonline.org. And you can click on the how to become a member button up at the top of the screen, and you can find out all kind of history about us. We also list the many roller coasters that we've honored over the years, including the roller coaster landmark plaques, which I'm a part of presenting and writing the information on those plaques. And Leap the Dips is one of the recipients of that, although that was done by my predecessor.
That's good. So,
Excuse me.
yeah.
I got that tickle from a cold.
That's
Um,
great.
Anyway, hope that's the end of it. Anyway, going forward, yeah, we like to present roller coaster landmarks across the country, and now we're starting to branch out to international amusement parks in Europe, and we also have one in Canada, and we had one in Mexico. Unfortunately, it was torn down just a few years ago. But we are reaching out to try to preserve as many historic wooden roller coasters and steel roller coasters as we can.
Oh, that's great. So, before we close out the show, I have just one more burning question. We'll see if we can answer it. Your all-time favorite roller coaster, anywhere, all time.
The one I'm riding.
Perfect.
Yeah, I love them all. I mean, it's some more than others, obviously, but it's hard to excuse me. It's hard to have a favorite coaster. I love them all. I mean, I just love roller coasters. I mean, and I will go out of my way when we're traveling, even if we're not doing a roller coaster trip, we will try to go out of our way to ride at least one or two roller coasters in the area. We're visiting a new park that we've never been to. My son and wife just recently went to Utah to go visit some national parks, but they had to stop at Lagoon Amusement Park as part of one of our ACE conferences that we have there. That's another thing that we do too with ACE, is we have big conferences and conventions several times a year, and where our members meet, and you get to meet other people like ourselves. And if you're like into roller coasters and you have a strong love of them like we do, you'll fit right in. And we even have some people that are not real strong roller coaster riders, but they love the camaraderie of it all, because we love all aspects of the amusement park. I mean, roller coasters, of course, being the primary focus of our organization, but we love carousels and dark rides and flat rides and spinning rides and kiddie rides. It doesn't matter. We love them all. And it's, let's face it, what is more enjoyable is to like relive your childhood by going to an amusement park. It does. It takes you back when you were a child, and we all become kids again when we're in the amusement park. So
I agree.
It's a lot of fun. Let's face it, there's a lot worse things out there.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get a natural high as opposed to a being on drugs or something.
Yeah, an artificial one.
Right.
So, there for my followers. You heard the guy. Go check out Ace. Join if you want to. Check it out. See what to do, because your money goes to help preserving.
Yeah, and you can get as involved as you want. I mean, there's no requirements. You can come to events, or you can just sit back and enjoy our periodicals that we you get a magazine 4 times a year, and or you can get an online magazine if you'd like, or you get the online newsletter instead. But there's several different levels that you can join at. And there's also you can get as involved and not involved as much as you want. But I think once you attend one of our events, there's no turning back. It's a lot of fun.
Oh. Dave, I thank you very much for your time about this. This was a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm also a history buff, and not everything is the most it's not as entertaining. A lot of it is somber when you look at history, but
yeah, that's
this one is not.
Exactly, that's why
a lot more fun.
A lot more fun to do. Yes, so I thank you very much for the time, Dave. I really do.
All right, thanks again, Thomas.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Remember, if you like the show, you can share it with all your friends. We can be found on all the major podcast players. We can be found on Facebook. And you can also find us and catch the show notes at historyfromthehomestead.com.